The old hall smelled of polished wood and sunlight that had slipped through tall windows, warming the dusty chairs and the stage where so many had performed before. She walked slowly through the empty rows, her hands lightly brushing the backs of the seats, feeling the smooth worn wood beneath her fingers. There was a quiet nervousness in her chest that she couldn't shake, though she had played the piano for more years than she could remember. Music had always been a private companion, something that filled the silent corners of her home and whispered to her when the world felt too loud or too empty. Today, however, the world was about to be very loud. The community center had organized a local talent showcase, and the hall was soon to be filled with people expecting remarkable performances. She was not remarkable in the way they imagined. Her melodies were simple, tender, often quiet, but they had always carried the small, personal stories she had gathered through her life. Memories of her childhood, of mornings watching the sun spill over the rooftops, of the gentle laughter of neighbors long gone. All these lived in her hands when she touched the piano keys. She carried her sheet music, worn and folded at the edges, and set it on the stand with care. Each note had been played 1,000 times in her home, and each had a weight of emotion that no applause had ever measured. She pressed her fingers to the keys, feeling the familiar coolness, and let out a small sigh. It was a moment she had imagined countless times. Yet now that it had come, it felt different. The stage was larger than any she had faced, the room more open, the air tinged with a mixture of excitement and expectation that made her pulse quicken. Backstage, she watched the other performers prepare. Young people with confident smiles practiced their difficult pieces, hands flying across their instruments, voices strong and sure. She admired them from afar, feeling a small knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. She wondered if anyone would listen to her simple melody, if anyone would notice the quiet beauty she carried. It had never mattered before, but now, under the bright lights and the expectant gaze of a crowd, it felt important, almost fragile. A kind volunteer approached her, a middle-aged woman with a warm smile. She placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Don't worry," she said softly. "People will feel your music. They'll hear the story you're telling, even if it's quiet. Just play from your heart." The words, simple as they were, settled into her chest. She nodded, feeling a flicker of courage in the midst of her nervousness. She took a few deep breaths, allowing the air to fill her lungs, grounding herself in the moment. She thought about why she had agreed to play today. It was not about recognition or praise. She wanted to share something real, something that might touch someone else in the way music had always touched her. Perhaps a note would remind someone of a memory they had almost forgotten, or a chord would ease a moment of sadness. That was enough, she decided. That thought steadied her shaking hands, and when her name was called, she walked to the stage with a careful, measured step. The hall was full now, the murmurs of conversation blending with the rustle of programs and the occasional cough. The lights felt warm on her skin, the air thick with anticipation. She adjusted her position at the piano, sitting with her back straight but relaxed, her hands hovering over the keys. She glanced briefly at the audience, seeing faces of all ages, some smiling, some curious, some expectant. A hush fell over the room as the previous performer finished and the applause faded. She felt the weight of the moment, but also a strange calm. She was here, she was ready, and her music was waiting. Her fingers touched the keys for the first time, softly, like a gentle breeze stirring the surface of a quiet pond. The melody began slowly, each note deliberate and unhurried. It was not a complicated piece, and it did not demand attention with dramatic flourishes or lightning-fast passages. Instead, it spoke in a language of warmth and familiarity, the kind of music that felt like a conversation intimate and sincere. She let the notes carry her memories, letting the music breathe as she had always done in her own living room. The audience listened, some leaning forward slightly, drawn in by the delicate sound that filled the space. She closed her eyes for a moment, imagining the rooms she had played in before, the sun streaming through lace curtains, the quiet ticking of a clock, the soft scent of tea in the air. All of it lived in the music she created, and she let herself be transported back while also reaching out to those sitting before her. It was a delicate balance, the merging of past and present, of private memory and shared experience. She felt the tension in her shoulders ease, replaced by a growing confidence that what she had to offer was enough. The first few measures passed, and she noticed a subtle shift in the audience. The murmurs had ceased entirely, and a quiet attentiveness filled the room. She could feel the focus of others, but it was not the kind that demanded skill or performance. It was the kind that waited patiently, allowing the melody to unfold naturally, like a story told in whispers. That recognition, simple and silent, gave her a new strength. She did not need to impress. She only needed to be herself, to let the music carry its own truth. As the melody continued, memories flowed through her. She thought of her first piano, the one that had belonged to her parents, its keys worn and slightly uneven. She remembered evenings when she would play for her younger siblings, the way their laughter mixed with the notes, creating an unspoken harmony of love and comfort. She remembered quiet nights alone, practicing and learning, each small victory and mistake shaping her understanding of music. All these memories colored the melody now, giving it depth and sincerity that could not be replicated with technical skill alone. The pianist's hands moved with a quiet confidence, guided by years of practice and the intuitive understanding that music was more than notes on a page. She let the pauses breathe, the soft touches resonate, and the gentle rise and fall of the melody speak without embellishment. Each chord was chosen with care, each transition deliberate. There was beauty in the simplicity, a clarity that invited listeners to pause and feel. She felt a sense of connection forming, subtle but unmistakable. The audience was no longer a crowd of strangers but a group of individuals, each carrying their own stories, and her music had found a way to touch them. It was a quiet triumph, the kind that left no room for showmanship but created space for shared humanity. Her heart swelled, not with pride, but with the warmth of knowing that something deeply personal was resonating beyond herself. By the time she reached the final notes, the hall was silent except for the lingering echoes of the melody. She let her hands rest on the keys, taking in the stillness, feeling the weight and release of the music she had poured into the room. Then, gradually, a soft wave of applause began, polite at first, then growing steadily as more people realized the depth of what they had heard. Faces in the crowd lit up with smiles, some wiped away quiet tears, and she felt a gentle tremor of emotion rise in her chest. It was not loud or overwhelming, but it was real, tangible, and shared. She rose slowly from the piano, bowing lightly, her hands still tingling from the effort and emotion of the performance. The applause continued, warm and appreciative, carrying with it the acknowledgement that her music had mattered, that it had been heard. She smiled softly, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and quiet joy filling her. The simple melody she had feared might go unnoticed had, in fact, become something memorable, creating a bridge between her life and the hearts of those around her. As she walked off the stage, she felt a sense of fulfillment that was deeper than any recognition or praise. Music had always been a companion, a confidant, and now it had also become a messenger. She realized that simplicity did not mean insignificance. A single, heartfelt melody could reach farther than the most elaborate compositions when it spoke from the soul. And in that moment, she knew that sharing her music, humble though it was, had made the day unforgettable. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had listened. The hall had begun to fill with people, and the gentle hum of conversation created a sense of anticipation that seemed to vibrate in the wooden floor. Children fidgeted in their seats, parents exchanged excited glances, and some older members of the community leaned forward, hoping to hear something that would move them. Among the performers, the young ones exuded confidence, their practiced smiles and sure movements showing that they were accustomed to attention. They rehearsed last-minute notes, adjusted their instruments, and whispered to each other in a mix of nerves and bravado. The elderly pianist watched from the side, her hands folded in her lap. She felt a mixture of nervousness and quiet determination. She noticed the boldness of the others and wondered if a simple melody, soft and unassuming, could capture the same attention. She reminded herself that her music was not about dazzling an audience with rapid notes or flashy technique. It was about emotion, the kind of music that told stories without needing to shout. But doubts crept in despite her resolve, whispering that perhaps today, her quiet music would be lost amid louder, more impressive performances. As she looked around, she noticed the young performers receiving nods of encouragement from the audience. Some were already clapping in approval before the performance even began, and a wave of insecurity washed over her. She shifted her gaze to the piano in the corner, polished and waiting, its keys gleaming under the stage lights. She could feel the warmth of the wood and the coolness of the ivory beneath her fingers even before touching it. That familiarity offered comfort, reminding her that music was always her friend, even in the presence of uncertainty. Backstage, a few performers whispered about the difficulty of the pieces they were about to play. One practiced a complicated sonata, his fingers moving almost too quickly over the keys. Another adjusted her violin bow, muttering about making the perfect first impression. The hall itself seemed to vibrate with the energy of anticipation. It was as if every corner of the room held the expectation of brilliance, and the elderly pianist felt a small pang of doubt about whether her own simple melody could meet such high hopes. A volunteer approached her again, this time carrying a small cup of water. "You look ready," she said kindly, placing the cup on a nearby table. "Just remember, it's not about being the most impressive. Play your music, and people will feel it." The pianist nodded, grateful for the gentle reassurance. She took a slow sip, feeling the cool liquid calm her racing thoughts. The simple act of being cared for in that small way reminded her that there was no need to perform for applause alone. Music was a conversation, and even if it reached only a few people in the audience, it would be enough. The first few performers went on, and the hall reacted with applause and smiles. The pianist watched closely, observing how the audience responded to technical skill and confident presentation. While she admired the talent, she realized that much of the appreciation was for technique rather than the emotional resonance of the music itself. That thought strengthened her resolve. She might not impress with speed or complexity, but she could still touch hearts in a way that went beyond surface admiration. She reflected on her own experiences with music. She remembered sitting at the piano as a child, learning to play slowly and deliberately, understanding each note's place and each pause's significance. She remembered nights when the only light in her room was the moon through her window, and the piano's soft notes filled the silence, speaking to her fears, hopes, and dreams. Those memories were not flashy or public, but they were profound and meaningful. It was these emotions she wanted to share, hoping they would resonate in the hearts of those who listened. The pianist's thoughts were interrupted as the host announced that she would be performing next. She felt a surge of nervous energy, her stomach tightening as she walked toward the stage. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she reminded herself that she was not racing anyone or competing with flashy performances. Her music had its own pace, and it deserved to be heard as it was. She adjusted her seating at the piano, taking a moment to breathe deeply and let the anticipation settle into calm readiness. Once seated, she glanced at the audience. Some faces were eager, some curious, and some seemed preoccupied, not yet aware of the quiet story about to unfold. She held her hands over the keys, feeling their smooth surface, the tiny ridges beneath her fingertips, and the invisible threads connecting each note. Music had always been a bridge for her, connecting the private and the public, the personal and the universal. She let that thought fill her with quiet confidence, knowing that sincerity in music could reach where virtuosity alone might not. She began with a soft touch, letting the first notes fall gently, almost hesitantly, into the hall. They were simple, unadorned, yet they carried a weight of experience and care. The audience responded without realizing it, the initial distractions and restless movements slowly fading as ears and hearts tuned to the subtle melody. She let each note linger, allowing the silence between them to breathe, and noticed how the audience shifted in their seats, drawn into the rhythm of her story. As she continued, she felt the hall's atmosphere change. The bold confidence of the younger performers had created excitement, but now a quiet attentiveness settled over the room. People began to listen with intention, feeling the emotions embedded in each chord. She imagined the memories she had poured into the music reaching the audience, connecting them to the life she had lived and the experiences that had shaped her melodies. The thought gave her courage, and her fingers moved with steadier grace, guided by a mixture of practiced skill and heartfelt emotion. She thought about the people who might be listening. Someone recalling a childhood memory, another feeling comfort in a lonely moment, someone else simply appreciating the beauty of a gentle melody. The simplicity of her music allowed space for each listener to experience it in their own way, without distraction or pretense. She realized that what made her music special was not its complexity but its honesty, its ability to speak directly to the heart without the need for showy techniques. The pianist noticed subtle signs in the audience. Heads tilting slightly, eyes narrowing in focus, quiet smiles, even a tear or two. Each small reaction reassured her that the melody was reaching them. She let herself be guided by these tiny gestures, adjusting her tempo and touch in response to the energy in the room. Music, she understood, was not only about playing notes correctly. It was about feeling and responding, about creating a dialogue that transcended words. As the piece continued, she felt a sense of shared presence forming. The audience was no longer separate. They were part of the music, participating silently but fully in its unfolding. She had never imagined that her simple melody could command such attention, but the realization filled her with quiet joy. Each note was a bridge, each pause a moment of connection, and the entire performance became a shared journey between her and those who listened. When the final notes faded into silence, the room remained still for a heartbeat longer than expected. Then, gradually, applause began to ripple through the audience. It started softly, polite but steady, and grew into warmth and genuine appreciation. The pianist felt her chest swell, not with pride, but with the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing something true and personal has touched others. Her simple melody, played from the heart, had found its way into the hearts of the audience. She rose slowly from the piano, a small bow acknowledging the applause. Her hands tingled from the effort and emotion of the performance, but the sensation was pleasant, a reminder that music had once again done its work. People approached her afterward, offering kind words, smiles, and subtle gestures of connection. They did not praise speed or technical skill but the feeling her music conveyed, the way it had made them pause and remember, reflect, or simply feel. Backstage, the pianist felt a mix of relief and gentle satisfaction. She realized that the day had begun with uncertainty and doubt, but now it had been transformed by the simple act of sharing what was true and personal. She understood that recognition was not measured in applause alone, but in the quiet way a melody could reach someone's heart. As she sat and watched the next performers take the stage, she felt gratitude for the opportunity to play and for the audience that had listened, ready to receive what was offered with open hearts. The air backstage was thick with anticipation. The next performers were preparing, tuning instruments, whispering last-minute reminders to themselves, while the audience outside waited, eager to be entertained. The elderly pianist watched quietly from a corner, hands folded loosely in her lap, her mind tracing the melody she would play once it was her turn again. She felt the familiar nerves tighten in her chest, a mixture of excitement and fear. She had played in front of small gatherings before, but the thought of the large hall and the expectant crowd made her heart race in a way it hadn't in years. She looked at the grand piano on stage, its polished surface gleaming under the bright lights. She remembered the times she had sat at smaller, older pianos in quiet rooms, practicing slowly, learning each note, savoring the feel of each key beneath her fingers. This piano was larger, more formal, and the stage made it look intimidating. But as she placed her hands lightly on the keys, she felt a sense of familiarity. Music had always been her companion, and this piano would be no different. It would respond to her touch, carry her emotions, and help her tell her story. The host announced her name, and she felt a small shiver of anticipation. She stood slowly, smoothing her clothes, and walked to the stage with careful, deliberate steps. Each movement was measured, yet there was an inner rhythm guiding her, a quiet confidence that she had earned through years of practice and dedication. She reached the piano, sat down, and adjusted her posture, letting the weight of expectation settle but not overwhelm her. Her fingers hovered above the keys, and she took a deep breath, feeling the room's energy around her. The audience was watching, curious and patient, some leaning forward, some sitting upright with polite attention, and others whispering to their neighbors about the performances they had already seen. She remembered the volunteer's words from earlier. Play from your heart. People will feel it. She let that thought guide her, letting go of any desire to impress and focusing only on the music she wanted to share. The first notes fell gently into the hall, soft and deliberate. Each note carried the warmth of memory, the quiet stories of her life. She had never played for applause or recognition, but she knew that music had the power to touch people, to create moments that lingered long after the final note faded. She allowed herself to feel each chord deeply, connecting with the emotions she had stored over the years, letting them flow naturally through her fingers and into the piano. At first, the audience listened politely, their attention gradually sharpening as the simplicity of the melody revealed its depth. The piece was not complicated or showy. It was gentle and tender, a reflection of life's quiet moments, of the memories that build slowly and linger in the heart. Some people closed their eyes, letting the sound carry them to distant places, to mornings bathed in sunlight or evenings filled with laughter. Others leaned forward, captivated by the sincerity of the performance, sensing the honesty in every note. The pianist's hands moved gracefully, guided by instinct and years of experience. She had learned that music was not only about technical skill, but about feeling, timing, and expression. Each pause, each soft touch, each rise and fall in volume was deliberate, conveying emotions that words could not capture. She felt a connection forming between herself and the audience, a silent dialogue that transcended speech. The hall, once filled with restless energy, had become a shared space of quiet attentiveness, everyone united in the experience of the melody. As she continued, she allowed her mind to drift through memories, drawing inspiration from them. She remembered the piano in her childhood home, the mornings when sunlight poured through the windows, and the quiet laughter of siblings as they sat nearby. She remembered long nights of practicing alone, learning to master each note, each rhythm, each pause. These moments had shaped her understanding of music, and now they flowed effortlessly through her hands, creating a melody that was personal yet universally relatable. The audience was responding, though subtly. Heads tilted, eyes softened, and a few smiles appeared almost imperceptibly at first. They were listening, truly listening, and the pianist felt a wave of warmth and reassurance. She did not need to play fast or complicated pieces to capture attention. The honesty of her music was enough. The simplicity of the melody allowed the listeners to fill in their own emotions, creating a shared experience that was deeply moving. She noticed one older man in the front row, his eyes glistening as he leaned slightly forward, absorbed in the music. She imagined what memories the melody might be stirring in him, what emotions it might be evoking. Across the room, a young woman closed her eyes, letting the gentle rise and fall of the notes soothe her tired mind. Each person in the audience was experiencing the music differently, yet all were connected through the shared act of listening. The pianist realized that this was the true power of music, its ability to unite, comfort, and inspire, even without grand gestures or flashy technique. The middle section of the piece flowed effortlessly, the notes cascading gently, creating a sense of movement and narrative. The pianist allowed herself to feel the music fully, to express the emotions she had carried for so long. There was a sense of freedom in this, a release from the nervousness that had gripped her earlier. She could feel the audience leaning in, their focus sharpening, their hearts open to the story she was telling through her fingers. Time seemed to slow as she reached the climax of the melody. The notes swelled gently, not in a dramatic or forceful way, but with a quiet intensity that drew the listeners in. The hall was silent except for the music, and the connection between performer and audience deepened. She felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that her music was touching people in a way that words could not. It was a shared moment of beauty, fragile and fleeting, yet powerful and memorable. As the final notes faded, there was a brief moment of stillness. The silence was profound, almost sacred, and the pianist let it linger before releasing her hands from the keys. The audience responded with gentle applause at first, then louder as the emotion of the performance sank in. People clapped, some standing, some wiping away tears, and the pianist felt a warm glow of satisfaction. She had not sought recognition, but the appreciation was a comforting acknowledgement that her music had mattered. She rose slowly from the piano, bowing lightly, her hands still tingling from the effort and emotion of the performance. The applause continued, warm and heartfelt, and she smiled softly, feeling a deep sense of connection with the audience. The music had created a bridge between her life and theirs, a shared experience that transcended age, background, and circumstance. She realized that the simple melody, gentle and unassuming, had become something memorable precisely because it spoke from the heart. Backstage, she was greeted by the volunteer who had encouraged her earlier. "You did wonderfully," the woman said, smiling warmly. "Your music touched everyone in the room." The pianist nodded, grateful for the reassurance, but also quietly proud of herself. She had taken a risk, sharing her simple melody in a space where louder, more dramatic performances were expected, and it had succeeded in its own way. The experience reinforced her belief that sincerity and emotion were more important than technical showmanship. She watched the remaining performers take the stage, feeling a sense of peace and fulfillment. Her music had found its place in the day's events, leaving an impression not through grandeur but through honesty and heart. The audience had responded to the story she had told with each note, connecting with it on a personal level, and that was a triumph she cherished deeply. She knew that the memory of her simple piano melody would linger in their minds long after the applause faded, creating a lasting resonance that no one could measure but everyone could feel. The hall had changed after the performance. What had once been a space filled with anticipation and curiosity now felt warmer, more intimate. People lingered in their seats, quietly talking about what they had just heard, reflecting on the gentle melody that had unfolded in front of them. The elderly pianist had stepped away from the stage, but the echo of her music seemed to linger, filling the corners of the room with a calm and reflective energy. Backstage, she leaned against a wall, breathing slowly, letting the adrenaline of the performance ebb. She felt a mixture of relief and quiet joy. The music she had always treated as private, something meant only for herself, had reached beyond her living room, touching strangers who had listened with open hearts. It was a feeling she could not have predicted, a warmth that came not from applause or praise, but from connection and understanding. As she watched the audience, she noticed how they were responding. Some were leaning toward each other, sharing whispers about how the melody had made them feel. Some had tears in their eyes, silently acknowledging the emotions stirred by the gentle notes. Even the younger performers, confident in their own abilities, paused in admiration, perhaps realizing that there was power in simplicity, that not every performance needed to dazzle to be memorable. A few people approached her quietly, offering kind words. An older woman touched her hand, smiling softly. "That was beautiful," she said simply. "It reminded me of my childhood, of evenings by the piano with my parents. Thank you for that." The pianist felt her chest tighten with emotion. She nodded, unable to speak immediately, and then whispered, "I'm glad it touched you." Another man expressed that the music had made him pause, think, and remember things he had forgotten. Each word, each gesture, affirmed that her music had found a place in the hearts of others. The pianist realized something profound in that moment. She had spent her life playing quietly, never seeking recognition or attention, and yet the music had a power that went beyond technical skill or complexity. It could create a shared experience, a moment of pause, reflection, and emotion. The audience's response was proof that music, when played with honesty and heart, could touch people in ways that mere showmanship could not. She felt a sense of fulfillment that was deeper than any applause, a quiet joy that resonated in her bones. She thought about the journey to this day, the years of practice in quiet rooms, the small recitals for friends or family, the moments of doubt and persistence. All of it had led to this, a simple melody becoming something memorable and meaningful. She realized that every note, every pause, every touch of the keys had been building toward this connection, creating a bridge between her life and the lives of those who had listened. Meanwhile, the audience continued to react in subtle ways. Some people were quietly exchanging memories, sharing how the melody reminded them of personal experiences. Others were lost in thought, their expressions reflective, as if the music had stirred something deep inside them. There was a sense of calm in the room, a shared understanding that this performance had been different from the rest, something that lingered not because it was loud or complex, but because it was sincere. The pianist watched from backstage as the next performers prepared. She saw them adjusting their instruments, taking deep breaths, and readying themselves for the stage. Despite her own earlier nervousness, she felt a sense of ease. She had learned that music was not about competing or proving skill. It was about sharing something true and personal. Her simple melody had reminded everyone of that truth, and that realization gave her a quiet pride that was both comforting and empowering. A young volunteer approached her again, smiling warmly. "Everyone is still talking about your performance," she said. "You made the day memorable in a way no one expected." The pianist smiled softly, feeling the truth in the statement. She had not sought to be remembered. She had only sought to share what was in her heart. And yet, the simplicity of the melody had left an impression stronger than she could have imagined. It was a lesson she carried with her, a reminder that honesty and emotion were far more powerful than technique alone. She thought about the moments in life that were quiet but meaningful. The mornings when sunlight spills over rooftops, the evenings filled with laughter, the gentle sounds that make a day feel complete. Her music had captured some of that quiet beauty, allowing the audience to experience it in their own way. The idea that a single, simple melody could evoke such deep responses left her in awe. She had always loved music for its personal connection, and now she understood how profoundly it could connect with others as well. As the applause continued for a few moments longer, she allowed herself to reflect. She realized that the performance had not only touched the audience but had also affirmed something within herself. The years of dedication, the quiet practice, the love for music, all of it had mattered. She had found a way to express herself honestly, to reach others without needing grand gestures or technical brilliance. That realization was more satisfying than any external recognition could ever be. Backstage, she sat quietly, letting the energy of the performance settle into her body. She could still hear faint echoes of the melody in her mind, each note carrying a story, a memory, a feeling. The connection she had made with the audience lingered, leaving her with a sense of purpose and fulfillment. She had been nervous, unsure, and hesitant, but the outcome was a gentle confirmation that playing from the heart was always worthwhile. She noticed other performers leaving the stage, some receiving applause, some not, and she reflected on the different ways people experienced music. Some sought skill and spectacle, others emotion and story. Her melody had belonged to the latter group, and the response showed that there was space and appreciation for sincerity, even in a world that often celebrated flash and speed. It was a lesson she would carry with her, a gentle reminder of why she loved music and why she had chosen to share it. As the day continued, people approached her intermittently, offering smiles, nods, and brief words of appreciation. Each interaction reinforced the feeling that her music had made a difference, however small. She understood that impact was not always loud or visible. Sometimes, it was subtle, quiet, and deeply personal. She felt content knowing that her melody had reached hearts and left an impression, becoming a memorable part of the day not because it was complex, but because it was sincere. The hall eventually began to empty, and the buzz of conversation gradually faded. The pianist stayed a little longer, walking slowly among the chairs, remembering the expressions she had seen on the audience's faces, the subtle gestures of connection, the quiet moments of reflection. Each memory reinforced the feeling that she had done something meaningful, that the music had achieved what it was meant to do, to touch lives, to evoke emotion, and to create a shared human experience. Finally, as the room grew quiet, she returned to the piano, placing her hands lightly on the keys once more. She did not play for anyone this time. It was a personal moment, a quiet reflection on the journey she had experienced. The notes fell softly, familiar and comforting, a reminder of the connection she had shared with the audience, the power of simplicity, and the enduring beauty of music played from the heart. And as she stood and turned away from the piano, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that her simple melody had indeed become the most memorable performance of the day. The hall had quieted, the hum of conversations fading into the soft sounds of chairs being adjusted and footsteps echoing along the polished floor. The day's performances were drawing to a close, and the elderly pianist stood at the edge of the stage, taking in the room that had earlier seemed so intimidating. Now it felt familiar, almost welcoming, as if the space itself had acknowledged the gentle music that had been shared. She breathed deeply, feeling a lingering warmth from the audience's reactions, a quiet satisfaction that resonated in her chest. People began to approach her more openly now, offering words of appreciation. Some were moved to tears, sharing personal stories of how the melody had reminded them of home, of loved ones, or of long-forgotten memories. Others simply nodded, smiling, acknowledging the subtle power of the music. The pianist listened to each person, accepting their gratitude with humility. It was not about praise, she reminded herself, but about connection. The invisible threads that music could weave between lives, hearts, and experiences. She reflected on the performance itself. Her hands had moved over the keys, guided by years of practice and by the deep well of emotion she carried. Each note had been a small offering, and it had been received with attention and care. In the quiet aftermath, she realized that the true success of a performance was not measured by applause or recognition, but by the moments of resonance it created. In these moments, music became more than sound. It became memory, feeling, and shared understanding. One woman approached her, holding back tears. "I can't remember the last time I felt this way listening to music," she said softly. "It reminded me of my childhood, sitting by my grandmother as she played for us. Your melody brought that back." The pianist smiled, touched by the words. She had never intended to evoke such specific memories, yet the simplicity of the music allowed each listener to hear their own story within it. It was the beauty of simple, heartfelt music. It became whatever the listener needed it to be. A young boy lingered nearby, eyes wide with curiosity. "How do you make it sound so gentle and happy at the same time?" he asked. The pianist crouched down slightly, meeting his gaze. "I play what I feel," she said simply. "The notes are like words in a story. If you listen to them carefully, they can tell many things at once." The boy nodded slowly, trying to understand. She smiled, realizing that her music had sparked not only emotion but also curiosity, a desire to learn and connect. Other performers and volunteers came by to share their thoughts as well. Some admitted that they had been caught up in technical skill, worrying about speed or complexity, and had not realized the subtle power of simplicity. They complimented her on the emotional depth of her melody, noting how it had lingered in the audience's minds even as the day's events continued. The pianist listened quietly, her heart warmed by the realization that the music had touched both audience and fellow performers. The afternoon sun began to filter through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the floor. The hall, once full of anticipation and nervous energy, now held a calm and reflective atmosphere. People moved slowly, some staying behind to chat, some leaving quietly, each carrying the memory of the performance with them. The pianist walked to the edge of the stage, glancing back at the piano that had become her companion for so many years. It had been more than an instrument. It had been a bridge, connecting her inner world with the hearts of strangers in a way she had never expected. She remembered the early years of practice, when the piano was a private sanctuary, a place where mistakes did not matter and emotions could flow freely. Those quiet hours had built the foundation for the music she played today. The simplicity of her melody, often overlooked in her own home, had proven its value in this larger, more public space. She realized that the heart of music was never in grandeur or complexity but in authenticity, in the ability to convey what words often could not. As the last of the audience began to leave, she lingered for a moment, letting the echoes of the music settle around her. She thought of each person who had listened, each subtle reaction, each tear, smile, or thoughtful expression. Her melody had created a ripple, a series of connections that extended far beyond the notes themselves. She felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not in recognition, but in knowing that she had shared something real, something lasting. Volunteers began to pack up chairs and clean the stage, but she remained, taking one last walk across the hall. Her fingers brushed lightly over the keys, not to play, but to remember the touch, the sound, the way the notes had resonated. Music had always been a companion, and today it had become a messenger, carrying emotion, memory, and connection to a wider audience than she had imagined. A group of performers approached her, offering smiles and gentle compliments. "You made today unforgettable," one said. "We will remember that melody for a long time." The pianist smiled, feeling a quiet pride. She had never sought to impress or outshine anyone. She had only played what was in her heart. Yet, the simplicity and sincerity of her performance had created the most lasting impression of all. As she gathered her things and prepared to leave, she reflected on the lessons of the day. Music did not need to be elaborate to be powerful. A simple melody, played with honesty and feeling, could reach places that complexity and showmanship could not. The impact of music lay in connection, in the way it could touch hearts and evoke memories, in the quiet moments when a listener recognized something familiar in the sound. That was the true measure of a performance. Stepping out into the late afternoon sunlight, the pianist felt a lightness in her heart. The day had begun with uncertainty and nervousness, but it had ended with fulfillment and joy. She had shared her music, a melody born of simplicity and sincerity, and it had become something memorable, leaving an impression on everyone who had listened. The warmth of that thought lingered with her, a quiet reminder that the heart of music was always worth sharing. Walking down the steps of the hall, she heard faint echoes of the applause and the soft conversations of the departing audience. Each sound carried a memory of the day, a gentle affirmation of the connection she had created. She smiled to herself, knowing that her simple piano melody had accomplished something remarkable. It had become the most memorable performance of the day, not because it was the loudest or fastest, but because it was heartfelt, honest, and shared from the soul. And in that moment, she felt complete, content, and deeply grateful for the power of music to connect hearts and create lasting memories.